The desert heat pressed down like a heavy blanket as Captain Sarah Chen adjusted her position behind the rocky outcropping. Through her binoculars, she watched the enemy patrol moving through the valley below. They had no idea they were being observed by one of the military's most skilled scout sniper instructors, disguised as an intelligence officer on what everyone believed was a routine reconnaissance mission. Sarah had spent the last 15 years perfecting her craft. She could put a bullet through a playing card at 800 meters and had trained some of the finest marksmen in the armed forces. But today, she wasn't supposed to be the one behind the scope. According to her official mission briefing, she was here to gather intelligence on enemy troop movements, not to engage targets. Her superiors had specifically chosen her for this assignment because they needed someone with a keen eye for detail and tactical awareness, skills that made her an exceptional instructor. The irony wasn't lost on her. The same generals who had pulled her from active sniper duties to focus on training the next generation of marksmen had now sent her into hostile territory, believing her instructor background made her perfect for passive observation. They had no idea that every fiber in her being was screaming to take action as she watched enemy forces positioning themselves to ambush an incoming friendly convoy. Her radio crackled softly in her ear. "Eagle Eye, this is command. Report status on target area surveillance." Sarah pressed the transmit button. "Command, Eagle Eye. I have eyes on approximately 40 enemy combatants establishing positions along Route Charlie. They appear to be setting up for an ambush operation." "Copy that, Eagle Eye. Continue observation and report any changes in enemy disposition. Friendly convoy is approximately 30 minutes out." Sarah gritted her teeth. 30 minutes. The enemy had chosen their position well, a narrow canyon with limited escape routes. The convoy would be sitting ducks unless someone acted fast. She could see at least 3 machine gun nests being established, and several enemy soldiers were positioning rocket-propelled grenades along the ridgeline. As an instructor, Sarah had drilled countless scenarios like this into her students. She had taught them to think 3 steps ahead, to anticipate enemy tactics, and to never hesitate when lives were on the line. Now, as she lay in her concealed position with her rifle at the ready, all those lessons seemed to mock her current orders to remain passive. The enemy commander was easy to spot. He stood near the center of their formation, directing the placement of weapons and soldiers with confident gestures. Sarah estimated the range at approximately 600 meters, an easy shot for someone with her skills. Taking out the commander would throw their entire ambush into chaos, giving the convoy a fighting chance to escape or call for backup. But her orders were clear: observe and report, nothing more. Sarah had earned her reputation the hard way. Growing up in a military family, she had always been drawn to the precision and discipline required for long-range marksmanship. Her father, a career Marine, had taught her to shoot when she was 12 years old. By the time she enlisted, she was already outperforming seasoned soldiers at the shooting range. Her first deployment had been a baptism by fire. Stationed in a mountainous region where enemy snipers had been picking off coalition forces for weeks, Sarah had quickly distinguished herself. In her first confirmed kill, she had taken out an enemy marksman who had been terrorizing a forward operating base from a position over 1,000 meters away. The shot had been so precise that it had become legendary among her unit. Over the years, Sarah had accumulated an impressive record: 47 confirmed kills, dozens of successful missions, and a reputation for never missing when it counted. Her fellow soldiers had nicknamed her Ghost because of her ability to remain undetected for days at a time while stalking targets through hostile territory. But success had come with a price. 3 years ago, during a particularly intense deployment, Sarah had been forced to make a shot that haunted her dreams. A young enemy soldier, barely 18 years old, had been positioned to fire a rocket at a school being used as a temporary medical facility. Sarah's bullet had saved dozens of innocent lives, but the image of that young face in her scope had never left her. The incident had prompted her superiors to suggest a change of pace. They offered her a position as a chief instructor at the military's premier sniper school. The role would allow her to share her expertise with the next generation while stepping back from the psychological toll of active combat duty. Sarah had accepted, thinking it would be a welcome change. For 3 years, she had poured her knowledge into eager young soldiers. She taught them about wind calculation, bullet drop, range estimation, and the 100 other variables that could mean the difference between mission success and failure. More importantly, She taught them about the mental discipline required to take a life when necessary and the responsibility that came with that power. Her students respected her not just for her technical skills, but for her wisdom and restraint. Sarah had a way of explaining complex concepts in simple terms, making even the most challenging aspects of long-range shooting accessible to soldiers with varying levels of experience. She had trained marksmen who went on to serve with distinction in conflicts around the world, and many of them credited her instruction with saving their lives in combat. Now, as she lay in the desert watching enemy forces prepare their ambush, Sarah felt the weight of her instructor role conflicting with her combat instincts. Every lesson she had taught her students about tactical awareness and decisive action seemed to argue against her current passive posture. The enemy was moving with practiced efficiency. Sarah could see they were experienced fighters, not the poorly trained militants that had become common in recent conflicts. Their equipment was modern and well-maintained, and their movements showed the kind of coordination that came from extensive training and battlefield experience. Through her scope, Sarah studied the machine gun positions. The crews were positioning their weapons to create overlapping fields of fire, a textbook ambush formation that would be devastating against the lightly armored convoy vehicles. She could also see several enemy soldiers digging in mortar positions on the high ground, preparing to rain indirect fire down on any survivors of the initial ambush. Her radio crackled again. "Eagle Eye, Command, what's your assessment of enemy capabilities?" Sarah took a deep breath before responding. "Command, Eagle Eye, enemy force appears to be well-trained and equipped. I count at least 3 crew-served weapons, probable mortar section, and what appears to be anti-vehicle capabilities. This is not a hastily organized militia. These fighters know what they're doing." "Copy, Eagle Eye. Convoy has been advised to expect possible contact. Continue monitoring." Sarah wanted to scream into her radio. Advising the convoy to expect contact wasn't going to save them from a well-planned ambush. She watched as the enemy commander consulted a map and pointed toward the approach route. He was timing everything perfectly, waiting for the convoy to enter the kill zone before springing his trap. The sun was climbing higher now, and the desert heat was becoming oppressive. Sarah's ghillie suit, designed to help her blend into the rocky terrain, was becoming an oven. Sweat stung her eyes, but she didn't dare move to wipe it away. The slightest motion could give away her position to enemy spotters. As she lay motionless, Sarah's mind wandered to her students back at the training facility. What would they think if they could see her now, paralyzed by orders while good soldiers walked into certain death? She had always taught them that a sniper's greatest weapon wasn't their rifle, but their ability to make split-second decisions under pressure. One of her most promising students, a young corporal named Martinez, had asked her during a recent training session how to handle situations where orders conflicted with tactical reality. Sarah had given him the textbook answer about following the chain of command and trusting in the bigger picture that officers might not always see. Now, facing exactly that situation herself, her own words seemed hollow and inadequate. The enemy was almost finished with their preparations. Sarah could see them settling into final positions, checking weapons, and establishing fields of fire. In her experience, they would probably wait until the convoy was completely committed to the canyon before opening fire, maximizing casualties and minimizing the chance of escape. She found herself calculating distances and wind conditions almost automatically. The enemy commander was still the most valuable target. His elimination would disrupt their coordination and possibly cause enough confusion to give the convoy a fighting chance. The range was well within her capabilities, and the wind conditions were favorable. But her finger remained off the trigger. Orders were orders, and Sarah had built her career on discipline and following proper procedures. She was here as an intelligence officer, not as a sniper. Her job was to observe and report, not to engage enemy forces regardless of how tactically sound such action might be. The irony of her situation was becoming increasingly apparent. The military had spent years training her to be a decisive, lethal weapon, then placed her in an instructor role to develop others with those same capabilities. Now they had sent her into combat with orders that effectively neutralized everything that made her valuable as a soldier. Through her binoculars, Sarah could see dust clouds on the horizon marking the approaching convoy. They were right on schedule, heading directly into the carefully prepared trap. The enemy commander was checking his watch and speaking into his own radio, coordinating the timing of the ambush with military precision. Sarah's training told her that she had perhaps 10 minutes before the convoy would be in the kill zone. 10 minutes to watch helplessly as fellow soldiers walked into a slaughter that she could prevent with a single, well-placed shot. The weight of her rifle seemed to mock her as it lay unused beside her observation position. The enemy fighters were showing admirable fire discipline, remaining hidden and silent as they waited for their targets to arrive. Sarah had to admit that whoever was leading this force knew their business. The ambush site was perfectly chosen, the fields of fire were expertly laid out, and the timing was being executed flawlessly. As the convoy's dust cloud grew larger, Sarah made a decision that would change everything. She began to move slowly and carefully toward her rifle, calculating angles and distances. If her superiors wanted her to observe, she would observe. But she would be ready to act when observation was no longer enough to save lives. The desert sun beat down mercilessly as Sarah settled behind her scope, watching the convoy approach its doom while the enemy waited in perfect ambush formation. Everything she had learned as a soldier, everything she had taught as an instructor, and everything she believed about duty and responsibility was about to be tested in the most crucial moments of her military career. Her radio remained silent, offering no new orders or guidance. The convoy continued its steady approach toward the canyon, unaware that their intelligence officer was facing an impossible choice between following orders and saving lives. In her scope, the enemy commander checked his watch one final time and raised his hand, preparing to signal the attack that would begin one of the most intense firefights of Sarah's career. The stage was set for a confrontation that would reveal the true nature of the woman the enemy believed was just another intelligence officer, not knowing they were about to face one of the military's most skilled and dangerous scout sniper instructors. The convoy appeared as a line of dust and metal moving steadily through the desert toward the narrow canyon where death waited in ambush positions. Sarah watched through her scope as the lead vehicle, a heavily armored transport carrying 12 soldiers, approached the point of no return. Her finger rested beside the trigger guard of her rifle, every instinct screaming at her to act while her orders demanded restraint. The enemy commander raised his fist, signaling his fighters to prepare for the attack. Sarah could see the machine gunners adjusting their weapons, the mortar crews standing ready with rounds in hand, and the rocket teams positioning their launchers for maximum effect. In 30 seconds, maybe less, 47 American soldiers would drive directly into a perfectly executed kill zone. Sarah's radio crackled one final time before chaos erupted. "Eagle Eye, this is command. Any change in enemy disposition?" "Negative, command. Enemy maintaining positions." Sarah's voice was steady despite the turmoil in her mind. She was about to watch good soldiers die because she was following orders to remain passive. The enemy commander's fist began to drop, the signal for his fighters to open fire. Time seemed to slow as Sarah made a decision that would define the rest of her military career. Her finger moved to the trigger, her breathing steadied into the familiar rhythm she had taught hundreds of students, and her crosshairs settled on the enemy commander's center mass. The shot cracked across the desert like thunder. The enemy commander spun and dropped, Sarah's bullet taking him down instantly at 600 meters. The precisely coordinated ambush dissolved into confusion as fighters looked around frantically for the source of the shot that had just eliminated their leader. In the crucial seconds of their confusion, Sarah was already working the bolt of her rifle and acquiring her next target. The convoy's lead vehicle rounded the bend into the canyon just as the first enemy machine gun opened fire, but without their commander's coordination, the ambush was already falling apart. Sarah's second shot took out the nearest machine gun team, her bullet finding the gunner before he could properly engage the convoy. "Contact front!" The radio exploded with urgent communications as the convoy realized they were under attack, taking heavy fire in the canyon. Sarah was already moving to her third target. Years of training and combat experience guided her actions as she shifted positions slightly to get a better angle on the mortar crew. The enemy fighters were starting to realize that someone was picking them off from long range, but they couldn't locate her position among the rocks and shadows. Her third shot silenced the mortar team's spotter, causing the crew to abandon their position and seek cover. Without effective indirect fire support, the enemy's ability to pin down the convoy was severely compromised. Sarah could hear the convoy's commander rallying his troops over the radio, organizing a fighting withdrawal from the kill zone. Eagle Eye, what is your status? Command's voice crackled urgently through her earpiece. Sarah ejected a spent cartridge and chambered a fresh round. Command, Eagle Eye is engaging enemy forces. Ambush has been disrupted. There was a pause before Command responded. Eagle Eye, you are not authorized to engage. Return to observation posture immediately. Negative, Command. Sarah's voice was calm but firm as she lined up her next shot. American lives are in immediate danger. I am engaging enemy combatants under rules of engagement for protection of friendly forces. Before Command could respond, Sarah fired again. Her fourth shot eliminated the second machine gun team, giving the convoy vehicles enough breathing room to begin maneuvering out of the kill zone. The enemy fighters were now actively searching for her position, but Sarah's concealment and the distance made her nearly impossible to locate. The convoy's return fire was beginning to take effect. Without their commander's coordination and with their heavy weapons being systematically eliminated, the enemy fighters found themselves in a desperate situation. Several began withdrawing from their positions, abandoning the ambush that had been perfectly planned until Sarah's intervention. Sarah's fifth shot took out an enemy fighter who was trying to reposition a rocket launcher to target the convoy's rear vehicle. The fighter spun and fell, his weapon clattering among the rocks. By now, the remaining enemy forces were in full retreat, realizing that their carefully planned ambush had become a death trap. All convoy elements, this is Eagle Eye. Sarah spoke calmly into her radio as she continued to scan for targets. Enemy force is withdrawing. I count approximately 15 to 20 fighters moving north along the ridgeline. You have a clear route south to exit the canyon. Eagle Eye, this is Convoy 6. The convoy commander's voice was filled with relief and amazement. Outstanding shooting. How many shooters do you have up there? Convoy 6, Eagle Eye. Single shooter providing overwatch. The silence on the radio was telling. A single sniper had just disrupted a well-planned ambush by 40 experienced fighters, saving the lives of everyone in the convoy. Sarah continued to watch through her scope as the enemy completed their withdrawal, dragging their wounded with them as they disappeared into the rocky terrain. Eagle Eye, this is Command. The voice that came through her earpiece was noticeably different in tone from the earlier transmissions. Report your current status and ammunition expenditure. Sarah checked her rifle and equipment before responding. Command, Eagle Eye, 5 rounds expended, 5 confirmed kills. Enemy force has withdrawn from ambush positions. Convoy is clear to continue mission. Eagle Eye, you are ordered to return to base immediately for debriefing. Roger, Command, Eagle Eye returning to base. As Sarah began the careful process of packing her equipment and preparing to move from her position, she reflected on what had just happened. In the space of less than 2 minutes, she had gone from being an intelligence officer following orders to observe and report, to a sniper who had single-handedly saved 47 lives by violating those orders. The return journey to base gave Sarah time to think about the consequences of her actions. She had deliberately disobeyed direct orders from command, engaging enemy forces, when she had been specifically instructed to remain in an observation role. While her actions had undoubtedly saved lives, the military justice system was not known for its flexibility when it came to following orders. Her radio remained mostly quiet during the trip back, with only routine check-ins required. Sarah could imagine the conversations taking place at command as officers tried to figure out how to handle a situation where an intelligence officer had performed like an elite sniper, violating orders but achieving results that exceeded anything they had hoped for from the mission. When Sarah finally reached the forward operating base, she was met by her commanding officer, Colonel Martinez, and 2 military police officers. The presence of the MPs made it clear that her unauthorized engagement of enemy forces was being treated as a serious disciplinary matter, regardless of the successful outcome. Captain Chen, you are to report to the briefing room immediately. Colonel Martinez's tone was carefully neutral, giving no indication of whether she was in trouble or being recognized for her actions. The briefing room was filled with more people than Sarah had expected. In addition to Colonel Martinez, there were intelligence officers, mission planners, and several senior NCOs who had been involved in planning the convoy operation. The atmosphere was tense, with everyone clearly unsure about how to proceed. Captain Chen, Colonel Martinez began, You were assigned to this mission as an intelligence officer with specific orders to observe and report on enemy activities. Instead, you chose to engage enemy combatants in direct violation of your orders. Do you have anything to say in your defense? Sarah stood at attention and spoke clearly. Sir, I observed enemy forces preparing to ambush a friendly convoy. Under the rules of engagement, I determined that American lives were in immediate danger and took action to protect them. Your orders specifically stated that you were not to engage enemy forces under any circumstances. One of the intelligence officers interjected. You directly violated those orders. Yes, sir, I did. Sarah's response was simple and honest. I made a judgment call that saving the lives of 47 American soldiers was more important than following orders that would have resulted in their deaths. The room fell silent as the implications of her statement sank in. Sarah had essentially admitted to insubordination while simultaneously claiming justification based on the results of her actions. It was the kind of situation that military justice manuals rarely addressed clearly. Colonel Martinez consulted a folder in front of him before continuing. Captain Chen, what exactly is your background in marksmanship and combat operations? Sarah realized that this was the moment when her carefully hidden identity would be revealed. Sir, I'm a certified scout sniper instructor with 15 years of active combat experience. I have 47 confirmed kills and have served as chief instructor at the Advanced Marksmanship Training Center for the past 3 years. The reaction in the room was immediate and dramatic. Several officers exchanged glances, while others began frantically flipping through files and documents. It was clear that Sarah's true background had not been properly communicated to the mission planners, who had assumed they were sending a standard intelligence officer on a routine observation mission. Captain Chen, Colonel Martinez's voice now carried a note of confusion. If you are a qualified scout sniper instructor, why were you assigned to this mission as an intelligence officer? Sir, my assignment came directly from division. They specifically requested someone with keen observational skills and tactical awareness for intelligence gathering. I believe they chose me because of my instructor background, not my sniper qualifications. One of the mission planners, a Major Sarah didn't recognize, spoke up. Sir, if I may, the mission brief we received described Captain Chen as an intelligence specialist with strong analytical skills. There was no mention of sniper qualifications or combat experience. The pieces were beginning to fall into place. Sarah's assignment had been based on incomplete information, with division focusing on her current instructor role while neglecting to mention her extensive combat background. The result had been a perfect storm where a highly skilled warrior had been placed in a position where her greatest strengths were supposed to remain unused. Colonel Martinez closed the file in front of him and looked directly at Sarah. Captain Chen, you put us in an extremely difficult position. You violated direct orders, which normally would result in court-martial proceedings. However, your actions saved the lives of an entire convoy and achieved tactical results far beyond what we had hoped for from this mission. Sarah remained at attention, but could feel the tension in the room shifting. The initial anger over her insubordination was being tempered by the reality of what she had accomplished. Furthermore, the colonel continued, it appears that your assignment to this mission was based on incomplete information about your qualifications and background. Had we known we were sending one of the military's premier sniper instructors into the field, our operational planning would have been significantly different. The intelligence officer who had earlier criticized Sarah's actions now spoke up again. Sir, if I may, the tactical situation Captain Chen described was exactly the kind of scenario where sniper support would have been invaluable. If we had known about her qualifications, we could have planned the mission to take advantage of her skills rather than restricting them. Colonel Martinez nodded thoughtfully. Captain Chen, I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I want a completely honest answer. When you made the decision to engage enemy forces, was it based on your assessment as an intelligence officer or your instincts as a combat sniper? Sarah considered the question carefully before responding. Sir, it was both. My intelligence training told me that the convoy was walking into a perfectly planned ambush. My sniper experience told me that I could disrupt that ambush and save lives. When I realized that following my orders would result in American casualties that I could prevent, I chose to act. The room remained quiet as everyone processed her answer. Sarah had essentially admitted that she had allowed her combat instincts to override her intelligence officer orders, but she had done so in a way that demonstrated clear tactical thinking and concern for mission success. Colonel Martinez stood up and walked to a map on the wall showing the area where the mission had taken place. Captain Chen, walk me through exactly what you observed and how you made your tactical assessment. For the next hour, Sarah provided a detailed breakdown of everything she had seen, from the enemy's positioning and equipment to their coordination and timing. Her analysis was comprehensive and professional, demonstrating the kind of tactical awareness that had made her an exceptional instructor and an even more exceptional sniper. As she spoke, it became increasingly clear to everyone in the room that Sarah's actions had been based on sound, tactical judgment rather than impulsive insubordination. Her decision to engage had been calculated, precise, and ultimately successful in ways that passive observation never could have achieved. When she finished her briefing, Colonel Martinez returned to his seat and looked around the room at the other officers. The message was clear. They were dealing with a situation that was far more complex than simple insubordination, and Sarah's true identity as a scout sniper instructor had changed everything about how her actions needed to be evaluated. The meeting that had begun as a disciplinary hearing was rapidly becoming a tactical assessment of one of the most successful combat interventions any of them had witnessed. Sarah stood quietly at attention, knowing that her career hung in the balance but confident that she had made the right choice when it mattered most. The tension in the briefing room had shifted dramatically over the past hour. What began as a disciplinary hearing for insubordination had evolved into something resembling a tactical case study. Colonel Martinez studied the faces of his staff officers, each of whom was grappling with the same fundamental question. How do you discipline a soldier for saving lives while violating orders? Captain Chen, Colonel Martinez finally spoke, I need to understand something. When Division assigned you to this mission, did they give you any indication that they knew about your sniper background? Sarah thought carefully before responding. Sir, the briefing officer mentioned that I was chosen for my keen eye for detail and tactical awareness developed through training experience. I assumed they were referring to my instructor duties, but they may have been aware of my combat background. Major Williams, one of the intelligence officers, leaned forward. Captain, in your professional opinion, would this mission have been planned differently if your sniper qualifications had been fully communicated? Absolutely, sir. Sarah's response was immediate and confident. With sniper support available, the convoy could have been routed through the canyon with overwatch protection already in position. The enemy ambush could have been detected and neutralized before any friendly forces were at risk. Colonel Martinez nodded slowly. Which brings us to the central issue. Your violation of orders resulted in a tactically superior outcome than what our original mission planning could have achieved. The room fell silent again as everyone contemplated the implications. Military discipline was built on following orders, but military effectiveness was built on achieving mission success and protecting lives. Sarah's actions had accomplished both, but only by violating the first principle. Sir, if I may, Sergeant Major Thompson spoke for the first time since the meeting began. As the senior enlisted man present, his opinion carried considerable weight. I've read the after-action reports from the convoy commander. Every one of those soldiers owes their life to Captain Chen's actions. That has to count for something. Colonel Martinez consulted another file. The convoy commander specifically requested that Captain Chen be commended for her actions. He's recommended her for the Bronze Star with Valor device. Sarah was genuinely surprised by this information. Military commendations were serious business, and the Bronze Star was awarded only for exceptional merit or heroic achievement. The fact that the convoy commander had initiated such a recommendation spoke volumes about how her actions were viewed by those who had benefited from them. However, the colonel continued, we still have the matter of direct insubordination to address. Captain Chen, regardless of the outcome, you deliberately violated explicit orders. The chain of command cannot function if officers make unilateral decisions to disregard instructions, no matter how well-intentioned. Sarah understood the position perfectly. Military discipline required that orders be followed, even when individual judgment suggested different actions might be more effective. Her violation of orders, however successful, had created a dangerous precedent that could undermine military authority if left unaddressed. Sir, I accept full responsibility for my actions and any consequences that result from them, Sarah said formally. I violated direct orders and am prepared to face appropriate disciplinary action. Major Williams cleared his throat. Colonel, if I may suggest, there might be a way to address this situation that serves both discipline and military effectiveness. Everyone turned their attention to the Major, who had been quietly taking notes throughout the discussion. Captain Chen's actions demonstrate exactly the kind of tactical flexibility and decisive leadership that we try to develop in our officer corps. Her mistake wasn't in her tactical judgment, but in her failure to communicate her capabilities and request permission to engage. The Major stood and moved to the tactical map. In a perfect world, Captain Chen would have contacted command immediately upon observing the ambush setup, identified herself as a qualified sniper, and requested permission to engage enemy forces. The fact that time constraints made such communication impossible doesn't change the principle. Colonel Martinez seemed intrigued by this line of reasoning. Go on, Major. What if we treated this as a training opportunity rather than a disciplinary matter? Captain Chen could develop a protocol for situations where specialized personnel are deployed in roles that don't fully utilize their capabilities. Such a protocol could prevent similar communication failures in the future. Sarah realized that Major Williams was offering her a way out that preserved both military discipline and her career. By framing her actions as the result of a systemic communication failure rather than personal insubordination, the situation could be resolved without setting a dangerous precedent for ignoring orders. Major Williams makes an interesting point, Colonel Martinez mused. Captain Chen, if you had been able to communicate with command and request permission to engage, do you believe that permission would have been granted? Yes, sir. Once command understood the tactical situation and my qualifications to address it, I believe they would have authorized me to engage enemy forces. So the real issue was a breakdown in communication and mission planning, not a failure of military discipline. Sarah began to see where the discussion was heading. Sir, that's correct. If my capabilities had been properly communicated during mission planning, or if time had permitted consultation with command during the engagement, the entire situation could have been handled through proper channels. Sergeant Major Thompson nodded approvingly. That makes sense, sir. Captain Chen followed her training and instincts to protect American lives. The failure was in the system that didn't properly account for her qualifications when planning the mission. Colonel Martinez spent several minutes consulting with the other officers in quiet conversation before addressing Sarah again. Captain Chen, here's what we're going to do. You will not face disciplinary action for your engagement of enemy forces. However, you will be tasked with developing comprehensive protocols for situations where personnel with specialized combat skills are deployed in support roles. Sarah felt a wave of relief wash over her. Thank you, sir. I'll begin work on those protocols immediately. Furthermore, the colonel continued, your sniper qualifications will be fully integrated into your personnel file to ensure that future mission planners have complete information about your capabilities. And I'll be recommending that Division review their assignment procedures to prevent similar communication failures. Major Williams smiled. Captain Chen, I think you'll find that your unique combination of combat experience and instructor capabilities makes you invaluable for developing the kind of flexible tactical protocols we need in modern conflicts. As the meeting concluded, Sarah realized that her career had taken an unexpected turn. Rather than being disciplined for insubordination, she was being tasked with developing new procedures that could improve military effectiveness across the entire command structure. 3 days later, Sarah found herself in front of a different kind of audience. The division commander, Brigadier General Harrison, had requested a personal briefing on the incident and her recommendations for preventing similar problems in the future. The general's reputation for demanding excellence and attention to detail was well known throughout the command. Captain Chen, General Harrison began, I've read the reports from your mission, and I have to admit that we have a problem. Our assignment procedures clearly failed to account for your actual qualifications, which nearly resulted in the loss of an entire convoy. Sarah had prepared extensively for this briefing, developing detailed recommendations for integrating specialized personnel more effectively into mission planning. Sir, I believe the issue stems from compartmentalized personnel records that focus on current assignments rather than overall capabilities. She moved to a presentation board that displayed her analysis. When Division requested someone with observational skills and tactical awareness, my instructor background made me appear ideal for the role. However, the request didn't trigger any review of my combat qualifications, which would have made me even more valuable in a different capacity. General Harrison studied the charts and diagrams that Sarah had prepared. What do you recommend? Sir, I propose a three-tier system for deploying personnel with specialized skills. First, all mission planning should include a comprehensive review of available personnel qualifications, not just current job assignments. Second, personnel with rare or valuable skills should have those capabilities flagged in their records so they can't be overlooked. Third, there should be established protocols for rapidly reassigning specialized personnel when tactical situations change. The general nodded thoughtfully. That makes sense. What about command and control issues when someone needs to operate outside their assigned role? Sarah had anticipated this question. Sir, I recommend establishing pre-authorized engagement protocols for qualified personnel in emergency situations. If someone with sniper qualifications is observing an imminent threat to friendly forces, they should have clear authority to engage without waiting for permission, provided they immediately report their actions and reasoning. That's a significant departure from standard procedures, Captain. Yes, sir, but modern conflicts often involve rapidly changing situations where waiting for permission can mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. The key is ensuring that only highly qualified and trusted personnel have such authorization. General Harrison spent several minutes reviewing Sarah's detailed recommendations. Her proposals were comprehensive, addressing everything from personnel record keeping to tactical communication procedures. More importantly, they were practical solutions that could be implemented without major disruptions to existing command structures. Captain Chen, I'm impressed with this analysis. How long would it take you to develop a complete implementation plan for these recommendations? Sir, I could have a preliminary plan ready within 2 weeks, with a full implementation timeline within 30 days. Do it. I'll be presenting your recommendations to the division staff next month, and I want a complete package ready for review. As Sarah left the general's office, she reflected on how dramatically her situation had changed in less than a week. She had gone from facing potential court-martial to being tasked with developing new tactical procedures that could influence military operations throughout the division. The irony wasn't lost on her. Her violation of orders had revealed systemic problems that went far beyond her individual actions. The military had spent years training her to be a decisive, lethal weapon, then placed her in situations where those capabilities were either underutilized or completely ignored. Her moment of insubordination had exposed the need for more flexible and responsive personnel management. Over the following weeks, Sarah threw herself into developing comprehensive protocols for integrating specialized personnel into mission planning. She conducted interviews with other soldiers who had found themselves in similar situations, reviewed after-action reports from conflicts around the world, and consulted with experts in military personnel management. Her research revealed that the problem was more widespread than anyone had realized. The military was filled with highly trained specialists whose capabilities were being wasted because of rigid assignment procedures and poor communication between different command levels. Snipers were being used as regular infantry, intelligence analysts were being assigned to administrative duties, and communications specialists were being deployed without their specialized equipment. The solution required a fundamental shift in how the military thought about personnel assignments. Rather than fitting people into predetermined roles, the system needed to be flexible enough to adapt roles to take advantage of available capabilities. Sarah's final report was over 200 pages long, detailing everything from computer system modifications to training requirements for personnel officers. The heart of her recommendations was simple. The military needed to become more agile in matching capabilities to mission requirements. When she presented her findings to the division staff, the reception was overwhelmingly positive. Several colonels mentioned similar situations in their own commands, where valuable capabilities had been overlooked or misused because of poor communication and rigid procedures. General Harrison announced that Sarah's recommendations would be implemented as a pilot program throughout the division, with plans to expand successful elements to other commands. More importantly, Sarah would be leading the implementation effort, working directly with personnel officers and mission planners to ensure the new procedures were effective. As she walked out of the briefing room after her presentation, Sarah realized that her career had taken a completely unexpected direction. She was no longer just a sniper or an instructor, but someone who was helping to reshape how the military utilized its most valuable resource, the specialized skills and experience of its personnel. The enemy had learned she was a scout sniper instructor in the most dramatic way possible, through the precision of her shots that had saved 47 lives. But more importantly, her own command had learned something even more valuable. That rigid adherence to procedures, no matter how well-intentioned, could waste the very capabilities that made the difference between mission success and failure. Sarah's transformation from instructor to tactical innovator was just beginning, and the lessons learned from her moment of necessary insubordination would influence military operations for years to come. 6 months after the Canyon incident, Sarah found herself in an entirely different kind of battlefield. The conference room at division headquarters was filled with personnel officers, mission planners, and field commanders, all struggling to implement the new flexible assignment protocols that had grown out of her recommendations. What had started as a simple after-action report had evolved into a comprehensive overhaul of how the military matched capabilities to mission requirements. Captain Chen, Colonel Davidson, the division personnel officer, addressed her from across the large conference table. "We're seeing some resistance from field commanders who feel these new protocols are too complicated for combat operations." Sarah had anticipated this pushback. Military culture was built on established procedures and clear chains of command. Introducing flexibility into a system that valued predictability was always going to be challenging. "Sir, the resistance is understandable, but the alternative is continuing to waste our most valuable capabilities when we need them most." She moved to the large display screen that showed implementation statistics from the past 6 months. "Since we began the pilot program, we've had 43 instances where personnel were reassigned based on mission requirements rather than their standard job descriptions. The results speak for themselves." The statistics were indeed impressive. Mission success rates had increased by 18%, and more importantly, casualty rates among units using the flexible protocols had decreased by 22%. The data suggested that properly matching capabilities to mission requirements wasn't just more efficient, it was saving lives. Major Roberts, a field commander who had been skeptical of the new procedures, leaned forward. "Captain Chen, I'll admit the results are good, but my concern is about command and control. When soldiers start operating outside their assigned roles, how do we maintain proper authority and accountability?" Sarah had spent months addressing exactly this concern. "Sir, that's where the pre-authorization protocols become critical. We're not talking about soldiers randomly deciding to change their roles. We're talking about qualified personnel having clear authority to use their specialized skills when mission requirements demand it." She pulled up a specific case study on the screen. 2 months ago, Staff Sergeant Martinez was assigned as a radio operator with a reconnaissance patrol. When the patrol encountered unexpected enemy positions, Martinez identified himself as a qualified demolitions expert and requested permission to neutralize the threat. Under the old system, that request would have required approval from multiple command levels. Under the new protocols, the patrol leader could immediately authorize Martinez to use his demolition skills. "And the result?" Major Roberts asked. "The patrol completed their mission successfully with no casualties. Under the old system, they would have had to either withdraw or call for backup, losing valuable intelligence and potentially compromising other operations." The room fell quiet as the implications sank in. The new protocols weren't just about administrative efficiency. They were about giving field commanders the flexibility to adapt to rapidly changing tactical situations. Brigadier General Harrison, who had been quietly observing the discussion, finally spoke. "Captain Chen, I want to understand something. How do we ensure that this flexibility doesn't become a license for chaos? Military discipline requires structure and predictability." Sarah had wrestled with this question throughout the development process. "Sir, The key is in the qualification requirements and authorization levels. Not everyone gets flexible assignment authority, only personnel with proven expertise and demonstrated judgment. And even then, they must operate within clearly defined parameters. She switched to a different slide showing the detailed qualification requirements. For example, combat authorization requires not just technical skills, but also leadership evaluations, psychological assessments, and command endorsements. We're not lowering standards, we're making sure that our highest standards can be applied where they're most needed. Colonel Martinez, Sarah's original commanding officer, had been following the implementation process closely. "General, I've seen this system in action, and Captain Chen is right about the safeguards. The personnel who qualify for flexible assignment are exactly the kind of soldiers we want making tactical decisions under pressure." The discussion continued for another hour, with commanders sharing their experiences with the new protocols and personnel officers explaining the administrative challenges of implementation. Through it all, Sarah found herself in the unfamiliar role of defending a system she had helped create, rather than simply following orders as she had throughout her career. The irony wasn't lost on her. The same qualities that had made her an exceptional sniper, attention to detail, ability to adapt quickly to changing situations, and willingness to take calculated risks, were now being applied to reshaping military administrative procedures. As the meeting concluded, General Harrison pulled Sarah aside. "Captain Chen, I've been watching your work on this project, and I have to say I'm impressed. You've managed to take a potentially career-ending incident and turn it into a major improvement in our operational effectiveness." "Thank you, sir. I just wanted to make sure that other soldiers wouldn't face the same impossible choice I did." "Well, you've accomplished that and more. I've been asked by Pentagon officials to brief them on our pilot program. They're considering implementing modified versions of your protocols across multiple commands." Sarah was stunned by this news. The idea that her recommendations might influence military operations beyond her own division was both exciting and daunting. "Sir, I'd be honored to support such a briefing in whatever way would be helpful." "Actually, Captain, I want you to conduct the briefing. You understand these protocols better than anyone, and you have the credibility that comes from having lived through the situation that created the need for them." 3 weeks later, Sarah found herself in the Pentagon, standing before a room filled with some of the most senior military officers in the country. The audience included division commanders, personnel specialists, and policy analysts, all of whom were evaluating whether her protocols could be adapted for broader implementation. "Gentlemen," Sarah began, feeling the weight of the moment, 18 months ago, I was a scout sniper instructor who violated direct orders to save the lives of 47 American soldiers. Today, I'm here to explain how that incident revealed systemic problems in how we utilize our most valuable military resource, the specialized skills and experience of our personnel." The presentation that followed was the culmination of months of research, analysis, and field testing. Sarah walked the audience through every aspect of the flexible assignment protocols, from initial personnel assessment to real-time mission adaptation. She presented case studies, statistical analysis, and testimonials from field commanders who had used the new procedures. More importantly, she addressed the fundamental question that had driven her work from the beginning. How could the military maintain its essential discipline and structure while becoming flexible enough to adapt to the realities of modern warfare? "The answer," Sarah explained, "isn't to abandon our commitment to following orders and maintaining clear command structures. The answer is to make our orders and command structures smart enough to take advantage of the capabilities we already have." General Morrison, one of the senior Pentagon officials, asked the question that Sarah had been expecting. "Captain Chen, some critics argue that these protocols essentially reward insubordination by creating official channels for soldiers to operate outside their assigned roles. How do you respond to that concern?" Sarah had prepared carefully for this question. "Sir, I would argue the opposite. These protocols prevent situations where good soldiers are forced to choose between following orders and saving lives. By creating official channels for utilizing specialized capabilities, we eliminate the need for the kind of unauthorized action that I was forced to take." She moved to a slide showing disciplinary statistics. Since implementing these protocols, incidents of unauthorized tactical decisions have actually decreased by 37% in participating units. When soldiers know there are official ways to use their skills effectively, they don't need to operate outside the system. The questions continued for over an hour, with officers probing every aspect of the protocols and their implementation. Sarah answered each question thoroughly, drawing on her months of experience working with field commanders and personnel officers to refine the procedures. When the formal presentation ended, General Morrison approached Sarah personally. "Captain Chen, I have to ask, do you ever regret that moment in the canyon when you decided to violate your orders?" Sarah considered the question carefully. "Sir, I regret that the system put me in a position where I had to make that choice. But I don't regret the choice itself. Those 47 soldiers went home to their families because I was willing to prioritize mission success over procedural compliance. And that's exactly the kind of thinking we need more of in today's military," the general replied. "Captain, I'm recommending your protocols for implementation across all major commands. We'll need to modify them for different operational environments, but the fundamental principles are sound." 6 months later, Sarah received orders that would once again change the direction of her career. She was being transferred to the Army Personnel Command as a special advisor for tactical personnel management. Her new role would involve working with commanders throughout the military to implement and refine the flexible assignment protocols that had grown out of her canyon experience. The assignment came with a promotion to major and recognition that her work had fundamentally changed how the military thought about utilizing specialized personnel. More importantly, it represented a formal acknowledgement that her moment of insubordination had been not just tactically sound, but strategically visionary. As Sarah prepared to leave her current assignment, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. She had started as a sniper, evolved into an instructor, and now found herself as an innovator who was reshaping military personnel management. The transformation hadn't been easy. There had been moments of doubt, bureaucratic obstacles, and resistance from commanders who preferred established procedures to innovative solutions. But throughout the process, Sarah had been guided by the same principle that had driven her decision in the canyon: the belief that military effectiveness ultimately depended on the ability to adapt and respond to changing circumstances. Her former students at the sniper school had followed her career transformation with interest and pride. Many of them were now using the flexible assignment protocols in their own units, finding ways to contribute their specialized skills beyond their official job descriptions. Corporal Martinez, the student who had asked her about handling conflicts between orders and tactical reality, had recently written to thank her for the example she had set. He had found himself in a similar situation during a recent deployment, where his sniper training had proven valuable in a mission where he was assigned as a standard rifleman. Using the new protocols, he had been able to provide overwatch support that had prevented casualties among his unit. "Major Chen," he had written, "you taught us that a sniper's greatest weapon isn't their rifle, but their ability to make the right decision under pressure. Your work on these new protocols has given all of us the tools to make those decisions within the system rather than outside it." As Sarah packed her office, she came across the original after-action report from the Canyon incident. Reading it again, she was struck by how clinical and matter-of-fact the language was. 5 rounds expended, 5 confirmed kills, enemy force neutralized. There was nothing in the official language that captured the weight of the decision she had made or its far-reaching consequences. But the real measure of that moment wasn't in the official report. It was in the lives that had been saved, the protocols that had been developed, and the fundamental changes in how the military approached personnel management. Sarah's violation of orders had exposed problems that went far beyond her individual situation, and the solutions that emerged had made the entire military more effective. The enemy had learned she was a scout sniper instructor through the devastating effectiveness of her intervention. But her own command had learned something far more valuable: that rigid adherence to procedures, without regard for changing circumstances or available capabilities, was itself a form of tactical failure. As Sarah prepared for her new assignment, she knew that her work was far from over. The military was a massive institution that changed slowly and carefully, but the principles she had helped establish were beginning to take root throughout the system. Future soldiers would have better tools for utilizing their specialized skills effectively, and fewer would face the impossible choice between following orders and saving lives. The woman who had been supposed to be just an intelligence officer had become something much more important, a catalyst for change that would improve military effectiveness for generations to come. 2 years after the Canyon incident that changed everything, Major Sarah Chen stood before a gathering of international military observers at the Joint Warfare Center. Representatives from 12 allied nations had come to observe training exercises that incorporated the flexible assignment protocols she had developed. What had begun as a solution to a single incident had evolved into a new doctrine that was reshaping military operations across multiple countries. Ladies and gentlemen, Sarah addressed the diverse group of officers, today you'll observe exercise adaptive response, which demonstrates how modern military units can maximize their effectiveness by properly matching personnel capabilities to mission requirements. The training scenario was complex, involving multiple objectives, changing tactical situations, and personnel with diverse specializations. What made it unique was that participants had been assigned to roles that didn't necessarily match their primary job descriptions, but were authorized to adapt their functions based on evolving mission needs. Colonel Hansen, the Danish military observer, raised his hand. Major Chen, how do you ensure that this flexibility doesn't create confusion or break down command structures? Sarah had heard this question hundreds of times over the past 2 years. Sir, the key is in the qualification and authorization system. Flexibility is earned through demonstrated competence and reliability. We're not changing who's in command, we're giving commanders better tools to use the capabilities available to them. As the exercise began, Sarah watched with professional satisfaction as the participating units demonstrated the principles she had helped develop. A communications specialist with demolitions training was authorized to clear obstacles blocking the unit's advance. A medic with sniper qualifications provided overwatch while treating casualties. A logistics officer with intelligence experience adapted the mission plan based on real-time enemy movements. Each adaptation followed established protocols, with clear authorization procedures and immediate reporting to maintain command oversight. The result was a unit that could respond to changing circumstances without losing cohesion or discipline. The exercise culminated in a scenario deliberately designed to echo Sarah's original Canyon experience. A reconnaissance team discovered enemy forces preparing to ambush a friendly convoy. Unlike Sarah's situation, however, the team had multiple personnel with combat specializations and clear protocols for utilizing those capabilities. The team leader, a lieutenant with engineering background, quickly assessed the situation and authorized his communications specialist, who had qualified sniper training, to engage enemy spotters while the team's medic, who had demolitions experience, neutralized the enemy's heavy weapons. The coordinated action disrupted the ambush before the convoy entered the danger area. Impressive, commented General Petrov, the Russian observer. This kind of tactical flexibility could be very valuable in asymmetric warfare situations. Sarah nodded. General, that's exactly what we found. Modern conflicts often involve rapidly changing situations where standard job descriptions don't capture the full range of capabilities needed for mission success. As the exercise concluded, Sarah found herself reflecting on how much had changed since that desperate moment in the desert when she had been forced to choose between orders and lives. The protocols that had grown out of that incident were now being studied and adapted by military forces around the world. The international interest had been unexpected but gratifying. Military officers from countries facing similar challenges with personnel utilization had reached out to learn about the American experience with flexible assignment. The principles that Sarah had developed were being modified for different military cultures and operational environments, but the core concepts remained consistent. Later that evening, Sarah received a call that would mark another turning point in her evolving career. Colonel Martinez, now serving at the Pentagon, had news that would once again challenge her assumptions about her future in the military. Sarah, he said, using her first name in the informal way he had adopted since her promotion, I've got an interesting opportunity for you. The Army War College wants you to develop a new curriculum on adaptive leadership and tactical flexibility. Sarah was intrigued but cautious. Academic positions were often seen as the end of active military careers, places where officers went to think about war rather than fight it. Sir, what exactly would that involve? You'd be developing and teaching courses for senior officers on how to create organizational flexibility without losing military discipline. Think of it as institutionalizing everything you've learned about making the military more adaptive and responsive. The opportunity was appealing in many ways. It would allow Sarah to influence how future military leaders thought about personnel management and tactical flexibility. More importantly, it would give her a platform to ensure that the lessons learned from her Canyon experience continued to evolve and improve. There's one more thing, Colonel Martinez continued. They want you to establish a research center focused on military innovation and adaptation. You'd be working with officers from all branches to identify and solve the kinds of systemic problems that you uncovered. Sarah realized that this assignment would represent the culmination of everything she had worked toward since that moment when she had violated orders to save lives. Rather than simply implementing the protocols she had developed, she would be creating institutional mechanisms to identify and solve similar problems before they resulted in unnecessary casualties or missed opportunities. 3 months later, Major Sarah Chen walked into her new office at the Army War College. The walls were lined with tactical manuals, case studies, and research papers from military conflicts around the world. Her mission was to study how military organizations could maintain their essential structure and discipline while becoming flexible enough to adapt to the rapidly changing nature of modern warfare. Her first students were lieutenant colonels and colonels who would soon command major units in combat zones around the world. These were officers who understood military tradition and the importance of following orders, but who also recognized that rigid adherence to procedures could sometimes prevent mission success. Gentlemen, Sarah began her first lecture, I want to start with a question. How many of you have been in situations where you had personnel with capabilities that could have changed the outcome of a mission, but those capabilities weren't being used because they didn't match official job descriptions? Nearly every hand in the room went up. That's the problem we're here to solve, not through abandoning military discipline, but by making our disciplines smart enough to recognize and utilize the full range of capabilities available to us. Over the following months, Sarah developed a comprehensive curriculum that addressed everything from personnel assessment to tactical decision-making under pressure. The courses attracted not just Army officers, but personnel from all military branches who were grappling with similar challenges. The research center that Sarah established became a focal point for military innovation. Officers would submit case studies of situations where rigid procedures had prevented optimal outcomes, and Sarah's team would work with them to develop solutions that preserved command authority while allowing for tactical flexibility. One of the most significant projects involved working with Special Operations Command to develop protocols for integrating specialized personnel into conventional units during joint operations. The challenge was to allow Special Operations soldiers to utilize their unique capabilities while maintaining the command structure and operational security of conventional forces. The solution required careful attention to both technical and cultural factors. Special Operations personnel had to be integrated in ways that respected the authority of conventional commanders while allowing their specialized skills to be used effectively. Conventional officers had to be trained to recognize and utilize Special Operations capabilities without compromising their own leadership responsibilities. The project was successful beyond expectations, leading to improved effectiveness in joint operations and better relationships between Special Operations and conventional forces. More importantly, it demonstrated that the principles Sarah had developed could be applied across different types of military organizations and missions. As Sarah's reputation grew, she began receiving invitations to speak at military conferences around the world. Her message was always the same. Military effectiveness in the modern world required the ability to adapt and respond to changing circumstances without abandoning the discipline and structure that made military organizations effective. The speech that would define her career came at the International Military Leadership Conference in London. Speaking before an audience of senior military officers from over 30 countries, Sarah addressed the fundamental challenge facing all modern military organizations. Ladies and gentlemen, she began, we live in an age where the nature of conflict is changing faster than our ability to adapt our organizations. The enemy we face today is not the enemy we trained to fight yesterday, and the enemy we'll face tomorrow will be different still. She moved to a large display showing conflict statistics from around the world. What hasn't changed is the importance of military discipline, clear command structures, and the willingness of soldiers to follow orders even in the most dangerous circumstances. The challenge is to maintain those essential qualities while developing the flexibility to adapt to situations our training manuals never anticipated. Sarah spent the next hour walking the audience through case studies from conflicts around the world, showing how military organizations that had developed adaptive capabilities had achieved better outcomes with fewer casualties than those that had relied solely on established procedures. The goal, she concluded, isn't to replace military discipline with flexibility. The goal is to make military discipline flexible enough to utilize the full range of capabilities available to us. The response was overwhelmingly positive, with officers from multiple countries requesting assistance in developing their own adaptive protocols. Sarah found herself at the center of an international movement to modernize military personnel management while preserving the fundamental values that made military organizations effective. 5 years after violating orders to save 47 lives, Sarah had become one of the military's leading experts on organizational adaptation and tactical flexibility. Her work had influenced military doctrine in countries around the world, and the protocols she had developed were being used by units in active combat zones with measurable improvements in mission success and casualty reduction. The transformation from scout sniper instructor to military innovator had been unexpected, but Sarah realized it represented a natural evolution of the skills that had made her effective in combat. The same attention to detail, ability to assess situations quickly, and willingness to take calculated risks that had made her a deadly sniper had made her an effective agent of institutional change. As she prepared for her next assignment, a posting to NATO headquarters where she would work on developing alliance-wide standards for personnel flexibility, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. The enemy had learned she was a scout sniper instructor through 5 perfectly placed shots that had saved an entire convoy. But the more important lesson had been learned by her own military, that the greatest waste of resources wasn't equipment or ammunition, but the failure to recognize and utilize the human capabilities that could make the difference between mission success and failure. The woman who had been supposed to be just an intelligence officer had become something far more significant, a catalyst for change that had made military organizations around the world more effective, more adaptive, and more capable of protecting the lives of the soldiers who served in them. Looking back at that moment in the canyon when she had faced an impossible choice between following orders and saving lives, Sarah realized that the real victory hadn't been the tactical success of disrupting the enemy ambush. The real victory had been the recognition that military effectiveness required the wisdom to know when adaptation was more important than adherence, when flexibility was more valuable than rigid procedure, and when the preservation of life was more important than the preservation of policy. The legacy of that moment continued to grow, influencing how military leaders thought about command, how personnel officers managed specialized capabilities, and how soldiers at every level understood their responsibility to contribute their full potential to mission success. Sarah's story had become more than just an account of tactical heroism. It had become a blueprint for military organizations seeking to maintain their essential character while adapting to the challenges of an uncertain world.